All right. Morning. So let's try to. Okay, so just go back a little bit and to remind you that we talk about the regulation, right? The two different glucose metabolic pathways, glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, and we specifically focusing on the three key reactions or reversal reactions in both, glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. And the first key reactions of the two enzymes, right, in two different pathways, like glucokinase, which is the key enzyme in the glycolysis, and glucose 6-phosphatase is the key enzyme in the gluconeogenesis, and how these two key enzymes that are regulated by substrate, the hormones, and then during the fat fasting condition. So that is a very important regulation that determines which pathway that glucose go to the metabolism. And we mentioned the key enzymes, the two different enzymes in two different tissues, right? The hexokinase in skeletal muscle and glucokinase in the liver or pancreas, and these two enzymes catalyze the same reaction but just in the different tissues. And this is a key slide. I think we talked about a little bit right already. Just tells us how glucokinase is regulated in the liver during the fat conditions. We know that glucokinase has to be activated during the fat condition, right, in order to promote the glycolysis in the liver. And what you need to remember that one important hormone, insulin, and three key substrates, how this substrate and hormones regulate glucokinase activation during the fat condition to promote glycolysis. So we mentioned that glucokinase basically localized in the nucleus, right, when it's not, low. Oh. There's a lot of batteries. Okay, better? No? Oh, hope it's not. Oh, it's jumped. Sorry. Okay, better? All right. So, and for, three substrate, right? I mean, the glucokinase basically in the nucleus when it's inactive and sequestered by a protein called glucokinase, regulatory proteins. It's bind, together, so glucokinase will not able to get into the cytosol for its activity, right? So the three substrate, fructose 1-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, and glucose. So they regulate glucokinase differently. Fructose 1-phosphate, which is metabolized from fructose, and glucose these two substrates basically activate glucokinase by releasing glucokinase from the nucleus into the cytosol, right? And fructose 6-phosphate is a substrate that is converted from glucose 6-phosphate, and this fructose 6-phosphate is inhibits glucokinase, but just inhibits the releasing of the glucokinase from nucleus to the cytosol, right? So try to remember, again, 3 substrate and 1 hormone insulin. So insulin basically just stimulate glucokinase activity by by both increasing the glucokinase production or gene expression, and also glucokinase protein activities, enzyme activities, right? So this is something happening in the liver. Glucokinase is again the key enzyme in the glycolysis pathway. So I just wanted to remind you that fructose 1-phosphate is metabolized from fructose, and fructose 6-phosphate basically is metabolized from glucose, right? Glycolytic pathways. So fructose 6-phosphate sort of serve as a negative feedback regulators, because it's metabolized from glucose, right? When we have a lot of glucose enter the cells and produces a lot of fructose 6-phosphate, and we always have our body always have a negative feedback mechanism, that would allow the activity not go too high, right? We need ATPs, but we don't need that much ATPs. So we have sort of again the feedback loop, negative feedback loop, to inhibit the glucokinase activity. So not allow the glycolysis to go too high, right? Activity go too high. Okay, so glucose 6-phosphate. The question? Yeah.
I was just curious if you could review. I think you might have just the term allosteric regulation.
Oh, you mean how?
Yeah, I mean, is that an example?
Sorry.
Is that? I'm sorry, the slide before. Is there allosteric regulation involved in this?
Yeah, some sort of, right. The particularly, if enzyme activity is regulated by substrate, the common mechanism is like, allosteric regulation. So changing the enzyme conformation or something, like this. Yes, you're right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we probably will talk about this later, or maybe
Okay.
not. But yeah, you're right. Okay, so glucose 6-phosphatase is the key enzyme in the gluconeogenic pathway, right? So catalyze the oxidation reaction, from fructose 6 to glucose. So these enzymes can be regulated by insulin as well, and together with the glucokinase, forming so-called substrate cycles. When we, for example, in the fat or same thing during the fasting, when we try to activate glycolysis pathway, and we also wanted to slow down the opposite pathway, right? They actually, metabolize glucose opposite. So we wanted to activate glycolysis, and we also want to slow down gluconeogenesis. So insulin, we know that is increased in the fat condition and to stimulate glycolysis. So in the meantime, we also wanted to slow down the gluconeogenesis. So that's just by general, thinking that insulin should inhibit the key enzyme in gluconeogenesis, right? So so this just sort of the diagram that show you, for example, here is the glycolytic pathway. Glucose entered cells and converted to glucose 6-phosphate. And this is actually the last reaction in gluconeogenesis. Glucose 6-phosphate is generated through the precursors, the pyruvate, lactate, or the glycerol, maybe other amino acid precursors, and generated from the precursors. And then the last step is to convert it, to glucose, right, and release into the circulation and during the gluconeogenesis. So this is the key enzyme that catalyzes the gluconeogenesis. So insulin does stimulate, in the fat condition, does stimulate glucokinase, but meantime insulin inhibits this glucose 6-phosphate. So allow the glucose 6-phosphate not be not be going to this pathway, but to the glycolytic pathway, right? So convert it to glucose 6-phosphate instead of converted to glucose and release. So does that make sense, right? So this, in order to complete oxidize glucose, the glycolysis pathway need to be stimulated, but this pathway need to be inhibited to allow more glucose 6-phosphate to go to the glycolytic pathway. Right? And we will talk about it later, about sort of a key metabolic point. And I just want to mention here that glucose 6-phosphate is one of the key metabolic points. That means this glucose 6-phosphate involves multiple metabolic pathways. For example, here is already we know, right, involved in the glycolysis and also gluconeogenesis pathway, and it's also the intermediate or substrate of the glycogen synthesis or glycogen breakdown pathway, right? So glucose 6-phosphate is the key metabolic point, right? Okay, now let's talk about the second key reactions in both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, which is fructose 6-phosphate, can be catalyzed to convert fructose 6-1,6-bisphosphate, which is the key pathway in glycolysis, right? And in the gluconeogenesis, and the reverse reaction can occur if the key enzyme fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase is increased. So this enzyme can catalyze conversion of fructose 6,1,6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate, right? So again, the phosphofructose 1 kinase is a key enzyme in the glycolysis pathway, and fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase is a key enzyme in the gluconeogenesis pathway. So, and then, and these two paired enzymes that are regulated by hormones like insulin and glucagon. But I just wanted to introduce this is like more complex concept and how these paired enzymes are regulated during fat and fasting conditions. And glucagon or insulin do not directly regulate these two key enzymes, but regulates the key substrate that we mentioned before, that is fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, right? So fructose 6-bisphosphate is the key substrate, and this substrate actually is not involved in either glycolysis or gluconeogenic pathway. That means that fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is not the intermediate in either glycolysis or gluconeogenic pathway. But this key substrate directly regulates these two key enzymes in the glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? This again is the second pair key enzyme in glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? And this substrate production, the production of this substrate or concentration of this substrate is regulated by the enzyme complex called a bifunctional enzyme, right? Bifunctional enzyme means that this enzyme has two key enzymes that work together, right, to catalyze the production of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, the key substrate. So bifunctional enzyme contains fructose 2 kinase and fructose 2,6-bisphosphatase. So try to remember these two bifunctional enzymes is different from these two key enzymes in the glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? Just this is the 2 kinase, phosphofructose 2 kinase, and the key enzyme is phosphofructose 1 kinase, right? And same thing, the bifunctional enzyme fructose 2,6-bisphosphatase, and the key enzyme in gluconeogenesis is fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. Again, these are the two different sets of enzymes, right? And that's this different function. So insulin and glucagon directly regulate activities of bifunctional enzymes, right? And bifunctional enzyme, the main function of bifunctional enzyme is to catalyze the formation or generation of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate. These are again the key substrate that directly regulates the two key enzymes activities in glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? The relationship, is that clear? This relationship, right? Okay, so now let's talk more about this key substrate, fructose 2,6-biphosphate. Again, is metabolized, and the synthesis and breakdown of this key substrate is regulated by bifunctional enzymes, right? And this substrate is not directly involved in the glycolytic pathway or gluconeogenic pathway. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question going back to the bifunctional enzymes.
Yeah.
So you said that both insulin and glucagon regulate these enzymes.
Right.
And then, insulin is going to regulate it during glycolysis, and then glucagon is going to regulate it during glucagon.
Right, correct. Yeah, we're going to talk about this later, okay? So then fructose 2,6-bisphosphate have increased the concentration of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate is increased by carbohydrate feeding or insulin stimulation and to promote glycolysis. For example, during the fat condition, when we consume food, particularly carbohydrate, and we raise the insulin level, right? So insulin can regulate bifunctional enzyme and can increase the production of fructose 6-biphosphate, and then this substrate can promote glycolysis by regulating, remember, the second pair of the key enzyme, right, in the pathway. And in the fasted condition, when glucagon and epinephrine levels are increased, the fructose 2,6-bisphosphate levels actually are decreased, are lower, right? So then promotes the gluconeogenesis. Okay, more information about bifunctional enzyme. So this just represented the bifunctional enzyme. All right, again, have two enzyme activities. And these two enzymes actually have a different function in terms of the the production of fructose-2,6-bisphosphate. For example, phosphofructose-2 kinase, one of the bifunctional enzyme, basically catalyze the formation or synthesis of fructose-2,6-bisphosphate. Right. So you see that the catalyzed addition of a phosphate group to the fructose-6 phosphate and generating fructose-2,6-bisphosphate, right? And the phosphate group basically is from ATP molecules, right? So phosphate group is transferred from ATP to fructose-6 phosphate and generating fructose-2,6-bisphosphate. So this is the process or reaction is the catalyzed by phosphofructose-2 kinase, right? And the other bifunctional enzyme, fructose-2,6 bisphosphatase, and this enzyme catalyzes the opposite reaction. That means that break down the fructose-2,6 bisphosphate and remove the phosphate group from the molecule and converted this molecule back to fructose-6 phosphate, right? Yes.
So is this like happening during glycolysis and that's during gluconeogenesis?
Correct. Yes. Right. But usually, I mean, these two, for example, the glycolysis, this enzyme will be increased and this enzyme will be decreased. So kind of work together, right? But you're right, in general. So again, just simply, say that phosphofructose-2 kinase catalyzes the synthesis of fructose-2,6 phosphate, and this substrate is very important to promote glycolysis, right? And fructose-2,6 bisphosphatase catalyzes breakdown of fructose-2,6 bisphosphate to reduce the concentration of fructose-6 bisphosphate, right? And then then to slow down glycolysis, but increase the gluconeogenesis, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And I just wanted to remind you again, if you still remember that we talk about phosphorylation, adding phosphate group to the protein or whatever the other molecules. The kinase usually catalyze addition of phosphate group to the molecule, right? And phosphatase usually catalyze the removal of phosphate group from a molecule. Right? So that will probably help you to understand a little bit better. Okay, so now here I just wanted to connect the insulin to the bifunctional enzyme and the substrate generation. Again, this is a two, bifunctional enzyme has two different enzymes, and this one catalyzes synthesis of the substrate, and this phosphatase catalyzes breakdown of the substrate, right? And insulin basically catalyzes the bifunctional enzyme. For example, what insulin does is to increase phosphofructose-2 kinase activity, but decrease fructose-2,6 biphosphatase, right? So the net effect of insulin will eventually increase the concentration or production of fructose-2,6 biphosphate. And glucagon does the opposite and decreases the phosphofructose-2 kinase and increases fructose-2,6 bisphosphatase, and net effect of glucagon will be decrease the fructose-2,6 bisphosphate. Right, is that clear? Okay. Any questions? Okay, so this is more kind of comprehensive. We connect the fat fasting condition, insulin levels, and the results of glycolysis and gluconeogenesis activity. So the top part of the slide show us is under the fat condition, insulin level should be high, right? And we know that we just mentioned in the last slide, insulin basically regulates the bifunctional enzyme directly, and insulin increases the fructose, phosphofructose 2 kinase, right, and decreases fructose 2,6 phosphatase. So eventually, insulin increases the concentration of fructose 2,6 phosphate, the substrate, and the substrate directly regulates the 2 key enzymes in the glycolysis, right? Increased fructose 2,6 phosphate activates phosphofructose 1 kinase, which is a key enzyme in the glycolysis, so promote glycolysis, right? And in the meantime, when fructose 2,6 phosphate concentrations increase, and that will decrease or inhibit fructose 1,6 phosphatase, which is the key enzyme in gluconeogenesis, right? So decrease gluconeogenesis. So this is the important mechanisms for how insulin coordinately regulates glycolysis gluconeogenesis during the fat condition, right? This is one of the mechanisms, of course, right? Because it's just the 1/3 of the key enzyme in glycolysis gluconeogenesis. Insulin also regulates the first key reaction, remember, the glucokinase, right? So insulin does multiple function, right? Regulates multiple enzyme activity. And again, this is just one of the important mechanism for insulin regulates glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, right? Okay, so the bottom part of the slide is the condition under the fasting, right? The fasting condition, and glucagon epinephrine levels increase, and this will causing the phosphorylation of the bifunctional enzyme at the serum residues, right? So glucagon epinephrine cause the phosphorylation of bifunctional enzyme at serum residues, and leading to decrease the phosphofructose 2 kinase and increase fructose 2,6 phosphatase, right? And the overall effect of the glucagon epinephrine is to decrease fructose 2,6 bisphosphate, right? So fructose 2,6 biphosphate, again, is a key substrate, can regulate the 2 key enzymes, right, in the 2 different pathways. So basically, when we have a decreased fructose 2,6 biphosphate, and we have decreased the activity of phosphofructose 1 kinase, so decrease glycolysis, okay, and increase the fructose 1,6 bisphosphatase and increase gluconeogenesis. Right? So you just try to remember the sequential, events of how these 2 enzymes regulated by glucagon and insulin. Yes, question.
Where does the glucagon and epinephrine enter, or how does it decrease the phosphate? Where does it get in there?
Oh, you mean how does glucagon decrease
By inhibiting that.
the bifunction enzyme?
Yeah.
Yes, right. So again, glucagon is a phosphorylated bifunction enzyme, so decreases this enzyme and increases this enzyme, right? And if you still remember, this two enzymes have a different function in terms of the production of fructose 2,6-biphosphate, right? So net effect will be decreasing the fructose 2,6-biphosphate, right? Okay, so now last pair enzymes in both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, which is pyruvate kinase in the glycolysis, the key enzyme in the glycolysis, and actually two key enzymes, right, in the gluconeogenesis, pyruvate carboxylase and the PEPCK, phosphoenolpyruvate carboxylase kinase, and see how these two different sets of enzymes regulates in fasting conditions. So relatively simple. The pyruvate kinase, the key glycolytic enzyme, right, can be activated by insulin and fructose 1,6-biphosphate, and fructose 1,6-biphosphate is intermediate, right, in the glycolysis of gluconeogenesis pathway. So it's different from the key substrate we just talked about. Right? Itself is intermediate in both glycolysis and gluconeogenesis. So when insulin levels increase or fructose 1,6-bisphosphate levels increase, that will lead to activation of pyruvate kinase and also increased glycolysis. And in the opposite direction, that during the fasting condition, glucagon or alanine levels increase, then can inhibit or decrease pyruvate kinase, so can slow down glycolysis pathway. And PEPCK, or the two key enzymes in the gluconeogenic pathway, the pyruvate carboxylase can positively regulated by acetyl-CoA, which it basically is signals, right? Then the needs, like we need more glucose, right? For glucose production. So when we have lots of acetyl-CoA, so during the fasting, basically the fatty acid oxidation will be increased because we try to spare glucose, right? So we wanted to use alternative energy fuels, so primarily like fatty acids or ketone bodies or protein amino acids. So when all this energy fuel metabolize or generate a lot of acetyl-CoA, so acetyl-CoA generation will tell the cells or bodies, we need actually make more glucose or something like this. So acetate is a very important molecule during the TC cycles and involved in the gluconeogenesis, right? Remember? But anyway, I mean the pyruvate carboxylase is positively regulated by acetyl-CoA levels, and PEPCK regulation is relatively simple, just by changing the gene expression of PEPCK and regulates PEPCK levels, right? And not like the other enzymes that can be regulate activity, phosphorylation or allosteric regulation. But PEPCK is only regulated at the gene expression level, right? Okay, so now let's talk about glycogen. So we have finished 3 metabolic pathway, right? Glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, and pentose phosphate pathway. Now we have 2 pathway left, which are glycogen synthesis and glycogen breakdown. So glycogen is a major storage carbohydrate, right, in animals, which usually occurred in two important tissues, right? You all know, I guess, liver and muscle, right? And the role of the glycogen, I guess we mentioned many times, right? We break down glycogen. The main purpose is to try to raise the blood glucose level during fasting. And in a fat condition, we try to store glucose, which come from the diet, in the stored energy in the body, so glycogen synthesis. And also we mentioned the contribution, in terms of contribution to the circulating glucose. Liver is able to release glucose from glycogen breakdown, right, during fasting, release glucose into circulation during fasting. The skeletal muscle also stored lots of glycogen, but were not able to release glucose into circulation during fasting because of what is the reason why? Lacking which enzymes? Glucose 6-phosphatase, right? So muscle breakdown glycogen only goes the glycolytic pathway used for energy within muscle. And glycogen metabolism involves the enzymes. First of all, the glycogenesis, also the glycogen synthesis, the same pathway, just a different, named differently. So glycogen synthesis pathways that involve enzymes, 3 enzymes like UDP, glucose, phosphorylase, right? And glycogen synthesis and branching enzymes. So 3 enzymes, I just wanted you to remember the key enzyme is glycogen synthesis, right? So glycogen synthesis is a key enzyme in the glycogen synthesis pathway. And in addition to 3 enzymes that involve the glycogen synthesis, UDP is also needed. UDP basically serves as sort of carry the glucose carry glucose to the site for glycogen synthesis. And then last thing is the glycogenin. Glycogenin is a protein. It's very important for initiation of the glycogen synthesis, right? And the second pathway is the glycogenolysis, also same the glycogen breakdown. So I just like to call it glycogen breakdown, so that make it a bit easier to understand, right? Since it's in the breakdown. And the enzyme in this pathway is glycogen phosphorylase and glucan transferase and debranching enzyme. And in the glycogen breakdown, glycogen phosphorylase is again the key enzyme, right, for glycogen breakdown. So just try to remember these 2 key enzymes that are highlighted in red in 2 different pathways, right? Okay, this just gives you some idea in how glycogen complex looks like. This, the glucose chain. We have a linear chain and branching chain, and there's the middle circle represent a glycogenin, right? Glycogenin again is very important to initiate the glycogen synthesis. And UDP glucose. This is the again the carry of the glucose. So glucose, basically free glucose, basically is added to the UDP molecules, right, forming UDP glucose. And So this is how UDP glucose is formed. First of all, free glucose need to be converted to glucose 6 phosphate first, and then glucose 1 phosphate. Then the glucose be transferred to the UDP molecules and forming UDP glucose, right? So this is the enzyme that catalyzes transfer of glucose from glucose 6 phosphate to UDP molecules, UDP glucose, pyrophosphorylase, right? Okay, now glycogenin. So glycogenin is again the key molecules, right, for initiation of glycogen synthesis. Shall we take a break? I guess. Right? Okay. Oh, yes.
I have a question. So what's the point of making the UDP or the UPD?
Oh, because that we will get there because maybe I can show you. So glucose need to be transferred to the site where the glycogen is synthesized.
Okay.
So then glucose, for example, enter the cells, and then make the UDP. So UDP is a molecule that carry the glucose to the site, where glycogen is synthesized.
Okay, so we need the UDP to carry the glucose
Right.
for glycogen synthesis to
Correct.
happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But yeah, I'll definitely let you know.
Yes, I just got the email, just received
Okay.
email. So I will
Perfect.
check. I'll definitely. There wasn't any paper that was not marked by name, but I'll still go through it.
Okay, because I'm thinking I might have put my name like right above maybe or something. I don't know because it was here and I think it was in purple pen.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. I just received the email, so just give me like an hour after.
I was gonna try to CC you guys on the emails, but I couldn't find your guys' names on the surface, so I just okay. Maybe I just didn't look at How did I get that one?
Which one wrong?
I only got 1 point on this one.
Yes, because it's 6 to 8 agencies, not 4 agencies. Are you adding this and this? It's supposed to be 6 to 8 because of the aerobics and RBC is anaerobic.
Yeah.
Like this one.
Okay. But then I have a different question. So I only got 3 out of 6.
Yes,
But
because when it asks about the sequential intracellular events, you have to mention how there is increase in the ATP-AGC ratio, potassium channel flow causes depolarization, increases calcium channel inside, then causes the release. I actually mentioned. That's why I got all that.
But that took off half, even though I got like.
Because that had 2 sequential steps. These are one-word answers. Last one. 2 steps. ATP ratio, potassium channel flow. What do you think?
I was just wondering why is that like, why do you get half points?
Oh, because it has 2 steps.
So they're each a point?
So there's like ATP ratio increases potassium channels.
What was the third?
That
What was the third step?
calcium.
Those. I thought
The calcium channel goes into there's accumulation of calcium. Follow the release of
So the increase of calcium causes the insulin.
Okay. Goes into potassium channels to depolarize.
So it's like an action potential?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 3 steps.
So how do you recommend studying for like, not clearly today's, but like next ones? Like
Her questions are basically more
more objective based?
like
Okay.
she will be asking about other regulation. No,
Okay.
I don't think
Sure.
she'll be asking about right and say
Sure. Yeah.
That's very objective. I haven't seen the quizzes, but so far
Okay.
How would we know? Maybe I just like read the story. I talked to you too, and like moving like into the pancreas. So how do we know like which details are
like in good two and good four, she would have asked you about how it is. The question is actually asking about intracellular.
okay?
These are transporters on the cell.
They are
So intracellular.
okay. I thought protein started inside the cells.
They're transporter, yes. But
And then
the
they go
sequential intracellular cascade
separate.
is yeah. This is how it is.
Okay. Alright. Thank you.
They literally know how to.
Okay, wait, so
I have a question. I just totally misread this. Like I didn't read the directions very carefully. So I thought that was yeah. I was thinking it meant
You had
you
to
were to
mention how many brain cells, because there's aerobic glycolysis, so to produce 6 to 8, and RBC is anaerobic. If
No, I know. I just misread the question. I thought we were supposed to like. This is completely wrong. I thought about that later, but like I didn't realize we're supposed to. Yeah. So that's my own misreading. But if you were to ask, if someone asked the question, I just want to make sure it's like, what is the product of glycolysis in both of those processes? Would it be pyruvic?
No, you have to be clear, because in RBCs there is no aerobic glycolysis at all. It's always going to be anaerobic. So even if the question is going to be like, what is the product of glycolysis, they'll probably mention what type of cells they want, because they are totally different. You can't say there is glycolysis in every cell in your body, but there are different types. Yes.
Okay. But
Glycolysis
isn't
takes place.
pyruvate always formed in the glycolysis pathway? And then when it becomes anaerobic, it turns, I mean, I'm saying it simplified, but it turns basically goes to lactate because NADH is...
I have to check that
Okay.
question.
I feel like it was something in the study guide.
I cannot answer you.
Okay, I'll okay.
I was wondering if I could get a pull back for this one, because I did have the two ATPs for the red blood cells.
I know that, yes.
I mean, it would be like a really big thing for me, just because then it would bump it from 7
See, I gave you here as well, marking it here.
Right.
I gave you that extra point. But, see, it asks you respectively.
Right.
I mean, you write two ATPs, I don't know where it is coming from, aerobic or anaerobic. Because they're two very different things. I did give you an extra point here.
It's just that then it would bump it to 80%.
Okay. I will tell you that Dr. Chen about.
Okay, thank you so much. One more question, just to get this like straightened out in my head. So it produces like a total technically of 6 to 8, but then to get used during the process of each.
So that's what we're saying, 6.
Yeah, but
So
what I was saying is like, since you're producing, so you're basically doing 4, but then you're going to use those 2 now. So you get
right, 6 and then 2 are. You're producing 8 and then 2 are being used. It's a total of 6 ATPs. After the ones that are used. Okay, let's get started. Sorry. So now let's talk about glycogenin. Right, so glycogenin mentioned as a protein, right? It's 37 kilodalton protein, and serving as the primer molecules for glycogen synthesis. So the first binding of a glucose to glycogenin from UDP glucose. Again, UDP is a carrier glucose, right, to the glycogenin. So bind the first glucose is bind to the tyrosine residue of glycogenin. Again, glycogenin is protein, right? And then you're adding more glucose to existing glucose to extend the glucose chain. And this process, again, you always glucose is carried by UDP, right? So always UDP glucose, add a glucose to the glucose chain. Yes?
I missed what 37DA protein.
Oh, 37 kilodalton, like a molecule weight of the protein. So 37.
That's how much glycogen.
Glycogen, yeah. So glycogen is 30, molecule weight is 37 kilodalton, right? Okay, so once you form the short chain glucose, which contains 8 glucose unit, right? To form 8 glucose unit, then the glycogen synthesis will take over the job to adding more glucose to extend the glucose chain, right? And also the branching enzymes catalyze the, the branching, adding the branching point, the glucose to at the branching branching point, right? And to to generating the branching chain of the glucose. Right? Does that make sense? So first of all, you need to form the 8 glucose short chain of 8 glucose, right? 8 glucose short chain that connect to the glycogenin. So glycogenin is the place that you adding the first glucose to the glycogenin, and at the tyrosine residues, and then you add more glucose to the existing glucose, so extend the glucose chain until you get 8 glucose chain, right? The short glucose chain plus the glycogenin, and this is so-called the primer molecules of the glycogen synthesis, right? So primer molecules includes glycogenin, proteins, and 8 glucose, right? Form as a short chain. You add it or connect to the glycogen. So after once you finish the synthesis of primer molecules, then glycogen synthesis and branching enzyme does a function to extend the glucose chain and also making the branching chain of glucose, right? Okay, so here I just give you an overview. We put actually 2 different pathways together, biosynthesis and break down the glycogen. So from the left side, on the left side from bottom to the top is the biosynthesis pathway, right? So, and the right from top to the bottom is the breakdown pathways of glycogen. So if you look at the left side, when we try to focus on the biosynthesis pathway first. So again, glycogen, of course, the synthesized started from glucose, right? So glucose, first of all, you converted glucose 6-phosphate, and that involved the glucokinase, right? Glucokinase can catalyze, this reaction, and glucose 6-phosphate that is converted to glucose 1-phosphate, and glucose then be transferred from glucose 1-phosphate to UDP and forming UDP glucose. So this is UDP that carry glucose, right, to the site where glycogen is synthesized. So adding glucose to glycogenin molecule as the tyrosine residue, right? And once this 8 glucose is added to form a short chain of glucose, then together with the glycogen is called a glycogen primer. So once glycogen primer is formed, then glycogen synthesis and branching enzyme that do the job, and adding more glucose and branching chain formation, and eventually form the very complex glycogen molecules, right? So I just wanted to you remember that the glycogen synthesis is a key enzyme, right, in this pathway, and also UDP is recycled, right? Once you give the glucose to the glycogen, and then you release the UDP, and then UDP can enter the cycle again, forming UDP and then UDP glucose again, right? So just keep cycling and providing, glucose for synthesis of glycogen. And for the glycogen breakdown, glycogen phosphorylase is the key enzyme and also involved other two enzymes, glucan transferase and deep branching enzymes, right, to break down the glycogen. First of all, the glucose 1-phosphate and then glucose 6-phosphate. And the last step is, glucose 6-phosphate converted to free glucose, and this is an enzyme, right, glucose 6-phosphatase. And again, this depends on the tissues. The liver, kidney, they have a glucose 6-phosphatase, so they will be able to, I'm just totally, not kidding. This actually, glycogen, but kidney does not have glycogen, right? I will mess up with gluconeogenesis, sorry. So again, depend on tissue, liver or muscle, right? Liver has a glucose 6-phosphatase, so glycogen be break down, eventually be able to release glucose into circulation, and muscle lacks this enzyme, so we're not able to release glucose, but just stop here and then go to the glycolytic pathway, right? And the other things I just wanted to remind you again, if you still remember that we mentioned before, the glucose 6-phosphate is the strong inhibitors of a glycogen phosphorylase. Remember, when we talk about the defects, the glucose 6-phosphatase, the patient, that we, the patient had the hypoglycemia and high lactate levels, but actually have a glycogen accumulation, right? Because of, again, if this enzyme doesn't function well, then glucose 6-phosphate cannot be converted to glucose, so leading to accumulation or buildup of glucose 6-phosphate, right? And this again is the strong inhibitors of the glycogen phosphorylase, so inhibits glycogen breakdown. So glycogen will not able to be break down, right, if patient lack this enzyme. And also glucose is also the strong inhibitors of the glycogen phosphorylase, right? So, which also makes sense, right? If we have a lot of glucose, that means probably under the fat condition, right? We have a lot of glucose from, the diet, so that will just tell our body, we don't need to break glycogen, so that is kind of mechanism, right, to inhibit, breakdown enzymes too. Okay, so this just adding some kind of regulation stuff, I guess. So in the fat condition, we have higher insulin and lower glucagon, right? So the ratio insulin to glucagon is actually increased. In the fat condition, this will stimulate biosynthesis pathways, basically stimulates glycogen synthesis activities, right? So can promote glycogen synthesis. In the fasting condition, when we have lower insulin and high glucagon, and that will lead to promote glycogen breakdown pathways, right? Just in general, how insulin and glucagon regulates glycogen breakdown or glycogen synthesis. The general regulation, right? Now let's talk about a little bit detailed regulation mechanism. So first mechanism called a cyclo AMP or CAMP dependent regulation. Try to remember that the cyclo AMP level is very important, the key that can control these two key enzymes in two different pathways. For example, insulin in the fat condition, when insulin level is increased, insulin causes a decreased cyclo-AMP levels. Because of insulin is inhibitors of cyclic nucleotide phosphodiesterase, right? So this is the enzyme that catalyzes the formation of cyclo-AMP, right? Again, cyclic nucleotide phosphodiesterase is the enzyme that catalyzes the formation of CAMP. So when insulin levels increase, and insulin inhibits this enzyme, so that leading to decrease the production of cyclo-AMP, right? So again, in general, insulin reduces the cyclo-AMP level, and this will promote the glycogen synthesis activity. So promotes glycogen synthesis. And during the fasting, because of a glucagon and epinephrine levels increase, so and these two hormones can increase the cyclo-AMP levels. Right, so I use the blue to indicate the pathway that stimulated by glucagon or epinephrine, and red is the pathway stimulated by insulin, right? So again, during the fasting, glucagon and epinephrine levels increase, then can increase the cyclo-AMP levels. And cyclo-AMP is very important regulators of the glycogen phosphorylase activity. So increased cyclo-AMP levels can increase glycogen phosphorylase activity, right? So and they can drive the glycogen breakdown pathway. So just try to remember the cyclo-AMP again is the key molecules, and the levels can regulate the two key enzymes. Again, increased cyclo-AMP regulates phosphorylase, glycogen phosphorylase activity, and promote glycogen breakdown. Yes.
So are you just saying that insulin and glucagon and epinephrine all regulate CAMP, and then CAMP regulates the glycogen enzymes? Is that what you're saying? Or
Right.
does
Right.
CAMP regulate all of that?
Right.
Levels of it?
The CAMP particularly regulates this data. When CAMP level increase, the phosphorylase is activated.
But the other enzymes regulate the CAMP. So if glucagon is active, then CAMP would increase, causing more glycogen breakdown.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So, and just thinking that insulin and the glucagon, they have opposite action, right? So if and cyclo-AMP levels increase, always promote the glycogen breakdown, right? To increase phosphorylase activity, and insulin levels is increased because you're thinking it should be opposite, right? So it should decrease cyclo-AMP, and then inhibit glycogen breakdown but promote glycogen synthesis, right? Okay, yeah, I think it's the same thing. I just try to explain it a bit more detail. So, okay. So I skipped that slide. I think it's the same, right? I mean, I just, do a different way, I guess. Okay, now because both glycogen synthesis and the glycogen phosphorylase can be regulated by phosphorylation, dephosphorylation, and I mentioned before the phosphorylation. In most of cases, that phosphorylation actually once this enzyme is phosphorylated, the enzyme activity should be increased. But in some cases, actually, phosphorylation leads to inactive, right? So here is kind of good example. For example, the glycogen synthesis, right? When it's phosphorylated and it's actually inactive, but glycogen phosphorylase, one is phosphorylated and actually is active. So, depend on enzyme, right? And similarly, glycogen synthesis when dephosphorylate is active, and glycogen phosphorylase, the dephosphorylate leads to inactivation. So just a kind of concept. Okay, so I think we already talked about, right, the cycle AMP levels is controlled by different hormones and regulates the phosphorylase, right? Here I just want to add one more layer. How the phosphorylation, the dephosphorylation of glycogen phosphorylase is regulated by cycle AMP. For example, under the fasting condition, right, and glucagon epinephrine levels increase and leads to increased cycle AMP, and the next step will be the protein kinase A, right? It's an enzyme. Protein kinase A usually catalyzes the phosphorylation of a protein, right? So once the cycle AMP levels increase and causing the activation of protein kinase A, and it is a protein kinase A that directly phosphorylated glycogen phosphorylase, leading to activation of phosphorylase, right? So just let the protein kinase A is involved, connected to cycle AMP and the enzyme phosphorylation and activity, right? Okay, so let's see. And this slide just this sort of summary, under the fat and fasting conditions, how glycogen metabolism is regulated by different hormones. For example, in the fat condition, what hormones are secreted? Insulin, right? And how glycogen synthesis is regulated by insulin. It's increased, right? Insulin increased glycogen synthesis, and how glycogen phosphorylate is regulated in the fat conditions. How? It should be decreased, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So decrease because of you have a decreased insulin, or you have a decreased glucagon epinephrine levels. So what happens to glycogen metabolism is should have a increased glycogen synthesis or glycogen breakdown, something like this. Glycogen synthesis, right? So in the fat condition, so glycogen synthesized and stored in the liver or muscle. And what about the fasting state? What hormones are secreted during fasting? Epinephrine, glucagon epinephrine, right? So glucagon epinephrine increase, and how glycogen synthesis is regulated. Mean that increase or decrease. Glycogen synthesis should be decreased, right? Yeah, due to insulin levels. So I would say here, maybe I'll try to make it a little bit clear. So usually insulin regulates more glycogen synthesis, right? And glucagon epinephrine regulates more glycogen phosphorylase activity. So, and how glycogen phosphorylase is regulated is increased, right? Because of increased glucagon and epinephrine. And what happened? Well, glycogen degradation, right? Breakdown. Okay. And we have a little bit more. Okay, I have a couple, actually 2 more slides. the in addition to the phosphorylation mechanism that can regulate two enzymes, that allosteric regulations also occur in the glycogen metabolism. For example, the three substrates are the important allosteric inhibitors, for example, ATP, glucose 6-phosphate, and free glucose, right? Remember the couple of slides earlier that we mentioned, right? Glucose 6-phosphate and glucose are the inhibitors of glycogen phosphorylase, and ATP also the inhibitor of glycogen phosphorylase. And allosteric activators. So 5'-AMP is strong activators of glycogen phosphorylase, and this 5'-AMP catalyze the phosphorylase, right, to activate the phosphorylase. And something a little bit specific, I think 5'-AMP usually binds the binding site. So muscle phosphorylase has the 5' binding site. So that means 5'-AMP usually regulates the phosphorylase in the muscle, because muscle phosphorylase is a little bit different from the phosphorylase in the liver. And liver does not have liver phosphorylase does not have a 5' binding site. So 5'-AMP is not the mechanism that regulates liver phosphorylase, right? So again, 5'-AMP does not regulate liver phosphorylase. Okay, so this is the last slide. I just make a comparison of the glycogen metabolism between liver and the muscle. So first, comparison is the amount of a total glycogen store. Depend on how we talk about it. For example, in terms of percentage of tissue weight, liver should have higher glycogen, right, than muscle, because of the glycogen is more condensed in the liver compared to muscle. And if we're talking about the total body content, of course, muscle, the total amount, the glycogen is stored more actually stored in the liver, right? Because in the muscle, because of large mass of the muscle compared to liver. So it's depend on how we compare. And the regulators, hormone and allosteric regulators. So both liver and muscle glycogen metabolism can be regulated by insulin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, but glucagon only regulates liver glycogen metabolism, right, and not the muscle. So in other words, during the fasting, when we have a higher glucagon, usually the main target will be the liver glycogen, right? We break down the liver glycogen and release glucose to raise the blood glucose level, and not the muscle, so which also makes sense, right? Muscle doesn't usually release the glucose. So again, glucagon only regulates liver glycogen breakdown. And in terms of the allosteric regulators, that both tissues, the ATP, glucose 6-phosphate regulates the glycogen metabolism in both tissues. But there's one thing is kind of different between these two tissues, is that free glucose only regulates the liver glycogen metabolism and not muscle, and vice versa. That 5'-AMP only regulates muscle glycogen metabolism, because of phosphorylase, muscle phosphorylase has a 5'-AMP binding site, but liver phosphorylate does not, right? So that's the reason why they only regulates muscle. And the last thing, the role of the stored glycogen, and break down glycogen from the liver, be able to, contribute the glucose the circulation to the circulation, right? And muscle, the breakdown glucose by glucose usually just utilized within the muscle, will not release glucose. So try to remember this kind of difference, the glycogen metabolism between the two tissues. So I think that's all we have for glucose metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism. And next Thursday we have exam 1, right? And the coverage was the carbohydrate metabolism, all carbohydrate metabolism, and digestion, absorption. I just very few questions. I think maybe 3 or maximum 4 questions, and very simple, I think. So I would focus on more carbohydrate metabolism. And in terms of format, right, we have a total 55 questions, and maybe 10 or 12 like choose false selection, and the rest of the questions are multiple choice, right? Good? Okay. And I also posted the example exam, so you can take a look at it, to get a sense of how exam format will look like. All right. And for next Tuesday, so next Tuesday is a review session. So I probably will talk about some kind of key thing that maybe you guys kind of confused or something like this. And also I would like you guys to focusing on the study guide and class notes. These are very important things. And try to go through the study guide. And if you have any questions, you can bring the class next Tuesday. Right? So I do the just go through all the important slides first, and then for the rest of the time, you guys can ask any questions from study guide or whatever you have.